This is Reporter Room with Jessica Della Davies.
Let's discuss Papa Rodger and those infamous connections back to Bryan Kohberger. So I think that the date of when this happened was chosen on purpose, which is why I wanted to share this particular post with you made by Papa Rodger. Let's continue on. And he also posted that the murderer is not in the victim's immediate circle. We know that is true. We know that Bryan Kohberger was not probably in their immediate circle at all. I don't think anybody really knew who he was. But I do believe that he fixated on Maddie, and I'm going to show you why in just a second. And now I want to talk about Maddie and why Maddie was the target. So let's go back to Elliot Rodgers. And he starts talking about his friend named Maddie. And so we now know that Bryan Kohberger did study Elliot Rodger. He was one of the SKs that he studied while he was at DeSale, while he was studying with Dr. Ramsland. So now we know why the house was chosen. It was selected because it was a party house. It was selected because of its location. And now we know also why Maddie was chosen, because Elliot Rodger talks about Maddie being his first friend in the world. As a child, I played with her as a equal. Now she was my enemy. I mean, this is just awful. I'm not going to read out the whole thing, but he, of course, he's scapegoating Maddie. And he talks about what he wants to do to her, just because what was Maddie's crime? She just didn't like him. So I believe Maddie Mogen was chosen by Bryan Kohberger because of her name, and because she looked like a cheerleader that he had a crush on in high school, and because he wanted to scapegoat Maddie for all of the wrongs that Bryan Kohberger perceived had been done to him, and also as a hat tip to his hero, Elliot Rodger. I also think that Bryan Kohberger was also doing a hat tip to Ted Bundy. Both Bryan Kohberger and Ted Bundy were born in November. Both Bryan Kohberger and Ted Bundy, I think Bryan Kohberger chose the Wah State Park as a alibi location because that is where one of Ted Bundy's alleged victims was found. They both attended college in Washington. They went to different universities, but both in Washington. And I believe that Bryan Kohberger and that article that Marianne Kohberger, his mother, wrote, that I think that he felt an affinity to Ted Bundy. But let's go back to Elliot Rodgers for a second. So I think that the Papa Rodgers account does look like Bryan Kohberger. Let me just see if I have one of those images. There it is. Let me do that. Let me move myself out of the way. I think and I think that this particular avatar was chosen for a couple of reasons. One, now this was an existing avatar of a Russian soldier, and I think it was chosen because it does resemble Bryan Kohberger, so he would have liked that. But I also think it was chosen because Bryan Kohberger was obsessed. He was absolutely obsessed, and he chose the town of Moscow. Remember, he drove across state lines from a state that did not have capital punishment in Washington to a state that did have capital punishment in Idaho. But what did the state have? It had a town called Moscow, which again links back to this Russian soldier that Bryan Kohberger had chosen. And I think he chose the town of Moscow, and he chose the avatar, one or the other, because of there is also a city in Russia called Moscow with the same spelling as Moscow, Idaho. So I think Bryan Kohberger would have liked that this avatar looked like him. I think he would have liked that it was a Russian soldier. We know that he was interested in the military in high school. He was removed from his high school class because of having problems interacting with women, allegedly. And I think that he would have liked that this was a soldier, because that's what Bryan Kohberger wanted to do. That's what he was interested in. And I think that this would have also tied him back to the town of Moscow, Idaho, and the city of Moscow, Russia. And so I think that all of these things, including the naming of his handle as Papa Rodger, would have all been a hat tip to his hero, in my opinion, Elliot Rodger. And this is why Bryan Kohberger was attending the Margaret Atwood Handmaid's Tale lecture. So after Bryan Kohberger's arrested, I started thinking, okay, Papa Rodger, Elliot Rodger, and if you look at the manifesto, Elliot Rodger also talks about hating all the girls from Alpha Pi. Now, what sorority was Kaylee in? Alpha Pi. So you can see all of these things are connected. So I think this all lines up with Bryan Kohberger's obsession. I think that he chose to attend the Washington State because of its links to Ted Bundy, which he studied about Ted Bundy while he was at DeSales. He chose the Wawa Y State Park because it was where one of Ted Bundy's alleged victims was found, and that's where he wanted his alibi to be. That's where he wanted to be part of the trial. He chose the Papa Rodger avatar because it was a soldier. He liked that. And because it was a Russian soldier, and he liked the Moscow connection. And so he chose Maddie because Maddie was one of the young women that Elliot Rodger named in his deranged manifesto that scapegoated women. And Papa Rodger account immediately stopped posting when Bryan Kohberger was arrested on December 30th. Now, a pop-up fake Papa Rodger reappeared like months and months later, but that was not the same account. That was, somebody just trying to, a poser, basically, somebody who was thirsty for attention. So we're going to talk about the top 12 takeaways from part 1 of the Amazon docuseries One Night in Idaho in just a moment. But I want to talk a little bit more about Bryan Kohberger and this Papa Rodgers. So we learned from his former classmate that Bryan Kohberger was interested in a lot of things, and he did have more than an interest in Elliot Rodgers. This is according to his former classmate. And the former classmate shared, I talked to other girls in the class, and we were all bothered by what Elliot Rodger did, but Bryan didn't seem bothered. And so, in my opinion, in light of some of the comments that have been attributed to Bryan Kohberger, where he told students at WSU that men were going to take the jobs away from women, that he was grading female students lower than he was grading men, and just him making misogynistic comments, and from Steve Gonzalez, where he was doing power plays, where he was using his body to block the young women as they were trying to come into and leave from class. Just again, power and domination moves, and then following the young women out to their car. I do believe that he was obsessed with Elliot Rodgers and Ted Bundy, that his psychology degree was all about who he was. It was Bryan Kohberger trying to figure out who he was. And I also think he got a bachelor's in psychology because that's the same bachelor's degree that Ted Bundy got. So Josh Ferraro referred to BK as an oddball in the Amazon docuseries. He said he is smart, but he is like a robot. And we saw this at the hearing where Bryan Kohberger was just cold as ice. No empathy for the victim's loved ones, no look of remorse on his face. And he said, this is Josh Ferraro said, purely based off the fact of his social inability to perform in a normal human manner, I can absolutely see someone like him being involved in something like this. Now, this is something similar to what we heard about the woman who was part of him being removed from his high school program. And when I say removed, I don't mean he was suspended. I mean removed. He was literally removed from his high school classes and had to finish classes online. So now I think we finally have some people that knew Bryan Kohberger coming out of the woodwork. And again, I don't think Bryan Kohberger had actual friends. They don't characterize themselves as friends. And they're all saying something similar, which is that Bryan Kohberger was not able to perform like a normal human being. And so instead of, I do think that instead of platforming somebody like Bryan Kohberger, that, and this is just going to make him more powerful and more infamous, and cause maybe another young man to want to emulate Bryan Kohberger, just like Bryan Kohberger wanted to emulate Elliot Rodger and Ted Bundy. I think we need to start calling these guys what they are. They're losers who cannot get a good and decent woman because they are not good and decent men. To get a good and decent woman means that a person has to be good and decent themselves. So instead of working on themselves, instead of trying to improve, instead of trying to make changes in their attitudes toward women, instead they scapegoated them, called them Stacy's, depersonalized them, and ultimately did away with them. And Bryan Kohberger, in my opinion, deserves to disappear into the prison system. He doesn't deserve to be studied and fawned over. And he doesn't deserve to have a platform to tell, quote, his side of the story, because there is no his side of the story. He picked Maddie as his target, in my opinion, because that's who Elliot Rodgers talked about in his manifesto. He talked about his friend Maddie and wanting to scapegoat his friend Maddie. So Bryan Kohberger broke into the 1122 King Road home. He did away with 4 beautiful, precious young people, Ethan, Kaylee, Maddie, and Xana, who were in their own homes, minding their own business. They were in their own bedrooms and not bothering anyone. So was Bryan Kohberger Papa Rodgers? Yes, I do believe that he was. I believe, for all of the reasons that I just shared with you, I believe that I have proved that Bryan Kohberger is Papa Rodgers. If you haven't subscribed, please hit the subscribe button. It's free and it helps me out a lot. Give this a thumbs up and drop me a comment. Let me know what you think about all of this in the comment section below.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I've been feeling weird, I can't seem to focus good enough. Nothing's really clear, sometimes it could be a little tough. I just need to feel